Jon Stewart intervened to try and get 9/11 first responders health care. This happened in, I think, 2010, and he was successful. Jon Stewart covered the story, and then the next day, Shep Smith covered the story, and it really put pressure and shamed the politicians in Washington to act. But now, apparently, that bill is running out of money, and they need more money, and they went on Fox News to discuss this. So let's take a look, and then we'll discuss.
This coming Tuesday will mark 17 years since the terrorists killed thousands in New York, D.C., and Pennsylvania. But many of those who survived the attacks of 9/11 are still suffering the effects. Thousands are now fighting cancer and other illnesses after inhaling all of that toxic dust for more than a month at Ground Zero. There are programs which offer help and compensation to first responders and survivors, but some of those who need the help are not getting it. Jon Stewart, John Fiel, and Richard Alice have spent years fighting to help 9/11 survivors. And I spoke with them earlier this week. The Zadroga bill was introduced. That's a bill that back in 2010 made the funding possible. There was resistance to it, which a lot of us here in New York weren't even aware was happening.
Right.
And we couldn't imagine who from New York or who from America could be against funding for people who were victims of this attack. And it turned out there were a lot of them, and a lot of them were playing politics by doing add-ons to bills. In other words, you've got this bill to keep first responders going or to keep any victim from there going, and they would tack on other matters, abortion or whatever it was.
Import-export tax. In 2015, it was they tried to take the money that could have come out of the transportation bill, and they were holding the Zadroga bill hostage to an import-export bill on oil.
Thankfully, it got through.
Yes.
But do you foresee any of those problems this time? Because, for instance, if one of your representatives in Congress or in the Senate or whoever it is who has to do the voting here, the no's, we'll be writing those down and telling you about them eventually. I promise that. But who has expressed opposition, John? Who has said, I can't be for this, and why? Anyone?
Sure. I mean, leadership on the Republican Party has always been against this. And
why?
The money. In the beginning when we were walking the halls in 2004 and 5 and 6, they said it was a New York issue. Then we showed them it was a national issue. Then they said, well, how are you going to pay for it? And that's like the oldest trick in the book. If they want to find money, they find money. Science caught up to Richie and myself and others who walked the halls of Congress because we knew this was going to happen. We said this was happening. The absorption through the nose, mouth, and skin. We ate there. We slept there. We cried there. We went to the bathroom there. We got sick because we went to the rush and to protect our city and nation. And every September 11th, all of these elected officials who are still in office from when we've been fighting since 2004, they come out and they say, we'll never forget 9/11. We'll always remember our heroes. That's BS.
Richie and John and I and everyone else from down there, we'll never forget roaming the halls with our good friend Ray Pfeiffer, who had stage 4 cancer and spent his last weeks fighting for his brothers and sisters to get this passed, because that's the type of person that he was and that's the type of courage. But man, I hope we never have to waste someone else's precious time that they could have with their families on that type of thing. It should no longer be that these guys have the burden of proof to their own government about what has happened to them. They were told down there the air was safe. Clearly it wasn't. And so, in honor of him, these guys will never stop fighting, and in honor of everybody else. But can't we make this time, finally, give them some peace?
This story says so much more about our government than maybe any other story. They don't represent you. They're not there to represent you. They're there to represent their donors. And their donors are usually billionaires and corporations, military-industrial complex, big oil. So you would think, as they point out, okay, come on, we could put all the BS aside for the 9/11 first responders who are all getting sick. So maybe we should have, some legislation here that makes it so that they can have their expenses paid for and they don't have to go bankrupt for medical bills. Nope. They still did all the fuckery behind the scenes. The bill was stalled. It was dead. And it was directly because of Jon Stewart doing that show and then Shep Smith picking it up the next day that led to basically the public just obliterating DC with phone calls and screaming at their members of Congress. And then they were basically shamed into acting. And now what they're doing is they're trying to get ahead of the next crisis because the funds are running low and there's still a lot of people from 9/11 who are sick, the first responders. So now they're trying to get ahead of it and make sure that they get more funding for that bill. And listen, man, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the Trump tax bill, actually, because under the Trump tax bill, all of the tax cuts that help working people, they expire after 10 years. The tax cuts that help corporations and the rich are permanent. Now think about the bill they're discussing here to give 9/11 first responders health care and funding. It had a sunset provision on it. So after a while, it ran out. So it shows you the priorities. It shows you the priorities. They have just endless amounts of money. They don't care. Take as much as you want when it's something they really prioritize. When it's endless war, $7 trillion for the war in Iraq by 2053. $7 trillion because it's paid for partially with borrowed money. The Wall Street bailout, $29 trillion. The F-35 too, over $1 trillion to make the F-35 too, and it didn't work for a long time. So when it's stuff for the military-industrial complex, when it's stuff for corporate welfare, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We don't need a sunset provision, unlimited amount of funding. We're just going to keep going here. When it's for 9/11 first responders for their health care, 10 years we'll give it. Even after the public shamed them into doing the right thing, there was a sunset clause. And think about it. If we had universal health care, we wouldn't have even needed a bill to give the 9/11 first responders health care because they would have had it if we had Medicare for all. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there should have been perhaps, another bill that gives them like extra money for their families because these people are passing away at 25 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old because all these rare cancers that they got from breathing in that toxic dust at 9/11 when they were heroes and they responded to what happened. So I think there should have been another bill for, money for the families and whatnot. But we wouldn't have even needed to have the healthcare conversation if we didn't have a disgusting backwards-ass healthcare system that screws over the American people. So look at all the ways in which our system is broken and disgusting. And we have to fight for bare minimums, basic necessities. And point is, you can't lay back, you can't relax, you can't rest because your government is not representing you. You have to force them to do the right thing. And that fight is not going to stop anytime soon.